The Baha'i faith was brought to Australia by Clara and John Hyde Dunn, an adventurous English-Irish couple who sailed into Sydney on April 10, 1920. Life was tough in Australia after the First World War, and work was hard to find. But a determined John Hyde Dunn soon became a successful travelling salesman with the Bacchus Marsh Milk Company, and as Clara held meetings and gatherings in Sydney, he worked his way around the vast Australian continent, giving talks about the Baha'i faith along the way. 2 years after the Dunns arrived, the first Australians became Baha'is. Oswald Whittaker, a Sydney optometrist, met Hyde Dunn in one of his business trips to Lismore in New South Wales. Melbourneian Effie Baker, shy but courageous, and one of Australia's first female photographers, met Hyde Dunn at a meeting and was immediately captivated by the faith. Effie would later go on to travel the world and photograph important Baha'i sites, most prominently in the birthplace of the religion, Iran. As the Baha'i teachings on the oneness of humanity and the unity of the world religions were heard in cities and towns across Australia, slowly but steadily a national Baha'i community grew. And then a defining moment. In 1934, there were enough Baha'is in Australia and New Zealand to form a joint national governing body, a 9-member assembly elected by representatives from both countries, and officially called the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Australia and New Zealand. As close as the two countries were, it didn't take long before the growth of the faith meant it was necessary for the two countries to stand alone. In 1957, a separate New Zealand Assembly was elected, and the former body in Australia became the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of Australia. The 1950s saw the first of many indigenous people become Baha'is in Fred Murray from South Australia. Also in that decade, Australian Baha'is focused internationally and made major contributions to the establishment of Baha'i communities in the Pacific Islands. In 1957, more exciting plans were announced. The decision to build a Baha'i house of worship in Sydney. A Baha'i house of worship is a place of prayer and meditation and occupies a special place in the hearts of Baha'is. But while the future would see 4 more houses of worship built around the world, Germany, Uganda, Panama, Samoa, and now one in Chile, back in 1957, only 2 houses of worship had been built, in Russia and the US. So for the small community of Australia, it was a great honor. And 1961 saw the official dedication. The Baha'i Temple, as it's known to many locals, occupies a prominent position in Mona Vale, in the hills of Sydney's northern beaches. The design was unique for an Australian building, and architectural historian Jennifer Taylor described it as one of the 4 major religious buildings constructed in Sydney during the 20th century. As this was going on, the 60s, with all its political and social upheaval, rolled into the 70s, and the Australian Baha'i community grew further as many people searching for spiritual direction and new ways of thinking found them both in the Baha'i faith. Suddenly the growth of the community surged dramatically as the Iranian Revolution of 1979 set off a wave of persecution against the Baha'is of that country, the land of the religion's birth. The Australian government was active in its defense of the human rights of the Baha'is of Iran, and in March 1982 established a special humanitarian assistance program to help Iranian Baha'i refugees migrate to Australia. Over the next few years, several thousand Iranian Baha'is came to this country, enriching the size and diversity of the Australian Baha'i community and making a major contribution to the country as a whole, excelling in fields as diverse as business, music, academia, arts, and community service. The 1980s saw the Australian Baha'i community continue its long involvement in peace activities at the national and local level. In 1986, the International Year of Peace, the community sponsored a peace expo in the grounds of the House of Worship, attracting 10,000 visitors. The Baha'i community received a Peace Messenger Award from the United Nations for activities throughout Australia. Since 1994, our efforts to promote peace have focused on 4 main areas of activity: human rights, the advancement of women, global prosperity, and moral development. The Australian Baha'i community has become recognised for its principles of abiding by the law of the land and taking a non-party political stance. It's also become increasingly known in religious and government circles for its active role in the interfaith movement, promoting religious unity and social harmony. Parents and teachers have welcomed the significant contribution of the Australian Baha'i community to religious education in state schools. In recent years, as interest has grown in different forms of spirituality, many people of various backgrounds have happily joined Baha'is in study circles and devotional meetings. The Australian Baha'i community has come a long way since the 1920s, and today is made up of people from all backgrounds and walks of life, a true reflection of the diversity of modern Australia. We invite you to get in touch, make inquiries, or join us in our activities.